Unflinching art is so utterly enthralling. It's an element that doesn't inherently make art good, but it does make it brave, and that bravery is something worth celebrating. To be brave about your thoughts is to be honest in your convictions, your experience, your life. This is Vile Exhumed. It's a retro-style analog horror game about exploring an old PC for information on the violent death of actress Candy Corpse via emails, chat logs, and encrypted files. And that's where the exhumed part comes in. You're effectively doing the digital act of digging up a dead body in uncovering the chain of events that led to it. I find myself returning to this word, unflinching, because the game in concept and content is genuinely unsettling and necessarily so. There's a sunlight's the best disinfectant to Vile Exhumed that makes you feel legitimately queasy as you play. It's not just the subject matter in itself, but also how intimate it all feels. Your role digging through the computer makes you simultaneously feel like a criminal investigator unearthing details of a grisly case and the criminal themselves. As I trawled through the killer's forum posts, DMs and emails, and found them, or I suppose me, talking to strangers and arranging meetups, I felt a pit forming in my stomach in anticipation of what was to come and what I had no power in preventing. Vile Exhumed is a startling game, but it does more than enough to artistically justify how off-putting it is. It understands that it's good to feel disgusted by art sometimes. It isn't edgy for edgy's sake, it has a vital, deeply affecting message to deliver about misogyny in the online age. In short, Vile Exhumed is worth playing, but right now you can't. Or at least not the full game. Exhumed, the director's cut, was planned to arrive on Steam this week, and a version of the game does exist on itch, but one day before the proposed launch date, solo developer Kara Cadaver and publisher DreadXP announced, "We've been waiting for build approval for about a month now, and since we haven't received any updates, we wanted to go ahead and preemptively let everyone know that we're going to have to delay the launch." They finished off a larger message saying, "We are as disappointed as you are, thank you for your understanding." Vile Exhumed is a genuinely horrific game that emulates gore and gives you squint and you might think it's real depictions of murder, misogynistic violence, and parasocial stalking, all behind the anonymous veil of early 2000s internet. The NGO Collective Shout has recently publicly pressured Steam and itch into removing NSFW games or deprioritizing them, making them less viable as a medium at the very least. However, Collective Shout even took aim at the likes of Detroit Become Human, admittedly in 2018, though things don't seem to have changed, for its depiction of women and child abuse, which I'd argue ignores the pretty on-the-nose metaphor David Cage employs. Collective Shout has a history of erroneously weaponizing censorious tactics to instill a chilling effect on art and conversations around it. The idea of removing access to anything with even so much as an NSFW tag or high age rating means that games like Vile Exhumed wouldn't stand a chance of being platformed in a version of Steam that Collective Shout would support. This isn't because Vile Exhumed is NSFW, but that storefronts acting out of fear of their payment systems pulling out can make them more likely to act with a heavy hand when deciding what does and does not get an adult tag. Vile Exhumed absolutely shouldn't be played by children or those who aren't in the right headspace to deal with its message, but still it should absolutely be played. I'm not saying that Collective Shout are directly behind the indefinite delay of Vile Exhumed's Steam release. I'm instead calling attention to the wider problems with censorship and the threat that makes to art. There is a whole host of very real, very gross, and very brutal art that's worth engaging with, but that can't thrive under the boot of puritanism. Here's what happened when I played Vile Exhumed. A long time ago, in a passage for either English or modern Japanese class, I read that at 17 you stop being human. You stop being human and you become either a star or a beast. This is a passage taken from the novel Astral Season, Beastly Season. It's a story that deals with the one-sided obsessive love two teenagers feel towards a pop idol. When news breaks that the idol had killed her boyfriend, the teenagers begin a series of copycat murders to pin the crime on themselves and spare their beloved celebrity. It's a novel that touches on sexism, both singular and systemic, through the idol industry, but also the ways that media can play into cultivating parasociality and the kinds of psychological vulnerabilities that cause people to fall into these rabbit holes. I kept thinking about this book as I played Vile Exhumed because both actually go some way into flashing those sprinklings of humanity in the people who do evil things. One of the first things I clicked on when I booted up the suspect's PC was a folder dedicated to their cats. All three have personalities and photos, and emails reveal that our main character was visibly distressed bringing a cat to the vet after they were afraid it had got rabies. Make no mistake, this isn't just a point made to show you his humanity, it's also an attempt to underline his misogyny. Our killer is capable of empathy, of care, but it's something he deliberately doesn't afford to the women he stalks and watches violent movies of and eventually kills. They are treated as beneath him, and that's why his tastes for gore are pretty much exclusively focused on femininity and perceived promiscuity. The game is pretty simple in execution. You click through files, sites, and .exe programs, which lead you down further rabbit holes to click through. And now every single part of this PC plays into the end goal of the game. Your central goal is to figure out who Candy Corpse is and where she is, but some lines of text are just there to add a sickly dark texture to everything. Vile Exhumed says when you boot it up that you should try and play through it in one sitting, and you can't even save the game. This, I think, is done to encourage that it's 1 AM, I should log off, but I'm not done yet feeling. After finishing it, I immediately went back in and didn't stop until I'd found something else. The game also has tons of little secrets. The wretched person behind this computer has an awful lot to hide, and you get through that by reading emails, putting street addresses, numbers, and letters together to get access to even more sites, and peeling back layers until you can't anymore. It's quite creative in its presentation and even leans into sickly, darkly ironic elements. There's a link between the darker elements of horror and snuff, and it feels very much like it doesn't come from a place of hatred for horror. In fact, there's an element to the game where some fans of the genre and even the more extreme things are treated as just human. That doesn't mean the game doesn't link the two, of course, and your interpretation of that will ultimately be yours. You can finish the game in under an hour, and as mentioned before, you are actively encouraged to finish it in one sitting. It contains overtly over-the-top and gross imagery. It's also very much one of those games you like or you don't. That feels redundant, but to clarify, what I mean is that it's abrasive in a way that I fully understand and appreciate if someone plays it and gets nothing from it. It's not like its themes are revelatory, but its tone and atmosphere are among the most striking I've played in some time. It's edgy and emotionally laid bare, either a calculated work to point the mirror inward, or a grander frustration at elements it touches on that are still pervasive today. There's this disconnect between my urge to analyze the game as a miasma of systems, to tell you how puzzles work and how the visuals are made, and there's this other urge that wants to dig into the way it affected me as a piece of art. But then again, that disconnect perhaps isn't as disparate as that tension implies. It can be genuinely, if not fun, then at least engaging to try and wrap your head around these puzzles, and doing that, getting into the mind of the person who owns this computer, feels downright voyeuristic. You read emails he sent, those he thought he deleted, and then piece together which parts are true, which parts rely on his own cognitive dissonance, and which parts are outright lies. The game doesn't directly say where that line is drawn, and that makes it more evocative. I had conversations after finishing the game around intent, and found myself conversationally sparring about what certain actions mean, how well or not well certain visuals are done, and what it says about psychosexual fantasy, violence, and literature. Vile Exhumed is the kind of game I was more expecting to play on itch than Steam. That's not me trying to put the game down or imply that itch and Steam have to do certain kinds of games, but more so that I'm surprised that it has publisher backing. Itch.io was once this beacon of light for devs creating games that were too weird or too niche for Valve's more mainstream marketplace, but in light of the current wave of content crackdowns, there's a very real possibility that itch will one day no longer be able to offer this refuge. This pulls me back into what I was saying at the start. There's a certain pain in the push and pull of a game like this having an unclear future, and groups like Collective Shout sneering at anything that in any way appears risque. In just my household alone, Vile Exhumed asked questions, ones I felt I needed to go some way to answer, and made me ask questions in response. The pressuring of banks to pressure Steam and itch to pull wide swathes of games without any thought into how or why is something that can make developers afraid of asking those questions of their audience, and if a question can't exist in the public sphere, how do we ever do the work of searching for answers? Vile won't last you very long to get through, and you may just hate it, but it feels important in its own right. You may be wondering why I've tied these two together, and I think I have to go back a little to explain why. Collective Shout used a game called No Mercy, which seemed to unapologetically support abhorrent acts as a wedge issue to pressure bank companies to pull out of Valve and itch, should they refuse to stop supporting adult games. According to the Wayback Machine, itch had 7,120 games with the NSFW tag on July 17th. Today, that number is 2. On July 17th, the adult tag had 17,444 games. Today, it has 49. In an interview with 404 Media, Naomi Clark, game designer and chair of NYU Game Center, talked a little about the line between adult as a section head for an incognito browser and adult as a sensitivity tag, one to warn you what you're getting into. She said people are scared of these changes and, quote unquote, the potential for it to be very nebulous and to spread to other categories, or any category that you can convince the CEO of MasterCard is objectionable and that his company should have no business with. She went on to say, I think that playbook could be replicated in ways that could get really dangerous for LGBTQ communities, especially in this political environment where anybody can weaponize the opinions of a banker or a payment processor against certain types of content. There are huge swathes of people who are in powerful positions who don't understand what games can potentially be about. Maybe they think like this is all garbage, or it's just for titillation or pure entertainment, no serious topics should be allowed. Enunciating how harmful this can be for an art form, she brought up 2 examples. The first caught up in this is Consume Me. Clark said that it's a autobiographical story about when she was a teenager struggling with eating disorders and her own relationship with her body, and she had it marked as sensitive content. Clark goes on to say, I was one of the advisors on that project, and I agree it's sensitive content because there's some disturbing, difficult teenage girl dealing with her body stuff in there. This was de-indexed on itch last week, despite the fact that it's launching on Steam in September this year, and that it won awards. The same happened to developer Robert Yang, who, after being delisted, said, I just wanted somewhere to post my weird gay video games, why can't they leave us alone? And this brings me back to Vile Exhumed. Collective Shout is seemingly not responsible for this problem. The problem here seems to lay with Steam and its moderation. As I mentioned prior, Collective Shout don't need to intentionally go after something for the effect of its business to harm developers of all kinds. I bring up this recent development because it's by extension a threat to all art, but also to further back up that this needs to exist. It needs to be playable and it needs to be critiquable. It needs to serve as one of many in a conversation, both individually and societally, as does all art. The threat that Collective Shout and these banking companies pose is one that will affect moderation. Even if Collective Shout sees tomorrow, a chilling effect has been put in place, and one that needs to be vocally opposed. Now, more than ever, is the time to put art front and center and use sunlight to kill the worst parts of ourselves. Thank you for watching my video on Vile. That was a strange one to write, a strange one to play, and a strange one to VO. This has been a weird week. And it's funny because I was planning on checking out this game anyway, and thank you for the publisher for sending one over for critique and coverage purposes, and then everything else around it happened. I did consider softening some of my words at the start of this, as I'm only kind of a growing channel and don't really know what to do to avoid being pushed out of recommended feeds, but it would feel a bit rich to soften my words and then talk about how important this art is. So I just wrote what came to me naturally. If this if this gets no impressions, so be it. I'm glad I've said something, regardless of what it is. I am considering doing a broader video on Collective Shout. I think it's kind of hard because it's definitely a story that keeps changing. Not the bare facts, but just how far it goes and how important it is. Anyway, if you manage to get the time to play this on itch, the non-director's cut, or it finally launches, let me know if you've played it and what thoughts you have and what I should know. This is a video about art, and art is subjective, so I'd love to hear your opinions on it. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you like this and you'd like to see me talk more about these kinds of things, then subscribing would really help me out, and so would liking. I don't know what the YouTube algorithm is going to do to this video, so any support I can get would be really valuable. Thank you.